I did talk in an earlier video about empowerment, and that's really what I am about, to see empowerment come to other people. But I got to thinking, as I was looking around and seeing what was going on and listening to people and just watching how crazy people are getting, I was beginning to think that maybe I should bring us all down to the very foundation of what we're going to have to do if we really want to have a society that is empowered. We have to start with ourselves. We can't do it for other people. We need to begin to see where we need to start as an individual and begin to work on ourselves towards this empowerment, because there's a lot more to it that I'm learning as time goes on. So in the first chapter of the empowerment series, I want to talk about, the environment that's necessary in order to be able to develop empowerment. And I think some of you are going to be kind of surprised to think this way. I think some of you are going to be a little upset in some regards, because it's going to create in you a little bit of a rattling for what maybe your belief structures are, or the way that your worldview is. So I'm going to ask you to just listen to it and just hear it and to just consider it. It's only words. You don't have to believe it. You don't have to do anything, but just pay attention and process what you're going to hear if you so choose. So to start out, I want to make sure that we're understanding what the word empowerment really means. So to go into the word empower, it's a verb, and it means to give power and authority to. So that could be to somebody else, or it could be to yourself. The synonyms are to authorize, train, instruct, discipline, and teach. So you can see that part of an empowerment has to do with teaching and instructing and disciplining yourself. The antonyms of this are to exclude, to shut out, or to rule out. So if you want to not be empowered, you're going to be ruling that possibility out. Then that is for the word empower, but empowerment has the suffix of ment. And ment, when I look that up, it's where the verb is going to meet and form a noun. So the noun, of course, we know is a person, place, or thing, and the verb is action. The suffix of ment is an act or a process of empowering. So when I am talking about empowerment, I'm talking about this act of process of empowering. So it's a process to get to this empowerment. Empowerment, you are giving power and authority to an act of empowering. So that can be giving it to yourself, or that can be giving it away. And that's what we're going to discuss today. So hold on to your hat. What is one giving power to? Is it the outside source, or is it the inside source? The environment that we live in has a lot to do with whether or not we can achieve the empowerment that humanity is supposed to achieve. So the question I have for you is, are we allowed to be in control of ourselves, or are we allowing somebody else to control us? And that's not only in personal relationships, that can be also in a society or a nation or anything like that. So I want you to bear that in mind. See if you can follow my stream of consciousness here, because this is I'm going to give you a little background on this so you have a little bit better understanding to what I'm really getting across here. So throughout history, there have been a lot of societies, in fact, all of these societies really have been oppressive to humanity. There's a lot of different names that it goes by, but there's really little difference in what is the end result of it. It's all oppressing. No matter what label you want to put on it, it's going to be oppressive. So we've had kings, we've had queens, we've had religions, we've had governments, and now we're kind of seeing the corporations coming in and controlling us, because they're controlling what we're saying, they're censoring what we're speaking. So all of these, the kings, the queens, the religions, the governments, and the corporations are all there to have the purpose of keeping you from being empowered, because they are going to oppress something from you and keep you in a state of more fear, in a state of disempowerment, and in a state where you feel like you're a victim, or that you can't quite get ahead, or you can't quite move forward. So these institutions that are pretty much out there for all of us to follow or believe in, they tell stories to spread fear, to keep you in the box, to keep you from listening, to keep you from researching, to keep you kind of just in menial little conversations. They will go through the media, they will go through the entertainment, they will go through the education, they will go through a lot of things to control what you're thinking, what you're believing in, and how your worldview is. For centuries, people have really been shoved into poverty. They've been shoved into hunger, they've been shoved into sickness, and they've been pushed into a place where they feel completely helpless and no way out. That is not a stance where you can be empowered. If you have somebody over the top of you, you can feel a little bit of empowerment on the inside, but not what humanity is here to do. We're supposed to be much more empowered than what we are allowed to be here. Humanity is left totally disempowered. That is exactly the opposite of where we really want to go. So in order to become empowered, we're going to have to really think this through, and we're going to have to look, and we're going to have to examine what it is we're doing and allowing. The mechanisms that are used to keep people in this oppressed state are fear. That's an emotional thing. And then they have continual wars going on, because you always have to have an enemy. You always have to have somebody that you got to fight. So you can be fearful of somebody. The enemy will get you, and then they have sickness that is very disempowering, because when you get sick, there's not much you can do. So the kings, the queens, the priests, the ministers, they're all totalitarian in a certain way, but they trick you. They trick you to think that you're empowered. All the while, they have you tremendously oppressed. So people bought into this, trusting people in power, and they walked really right into this allowance of individuals who are less than carrying integrity with them and are somewhat corrupt for the total reason to control humanity. You can call it any label you want to. Totalitarian is totalitarian. What happened in history, this is a little tiny, short little history lesson, is people became tired of being oppressed. They began to gain a little bit more consciousness. They began to realize things about themselves. They began to question things. And as they got tired of being oppressed, they realized that, why am I working so hard just to pay somebody to tell me what to do? And they're living high on the hog in ivory towers, and they're not doing any work. They're not doing anything to help me to be empowered or the population to be empowered. They're just always taking from the population. And there's been times throughout history, a lot of places in the world, people just barely survive. They work very hard through the summer season, collect what they can for the winter, and then they have enough to get by. But there's more to life than just that. That's just on a survival mode. So as people got tired of paying taxes to people that didn't want to do anything, they got tired of being sick and told that they can't do what their remedies are because they're foolish. So you have to pay money to go do this, another way of theft. They just, decided that this isn't good. They don't like it. They feel bottled in. They feel oppressed. This is an environment that we're in. And this is an environment that's going to hold you back from being empowered. So what happened is a new paradigm started to change back a few centuries ago, where good men came together and they decided that they don't want to be under the monarchy anymore. They don't want to be under a governmental system anymore. They don't want to really listen to the dictates of the church, the formed religions, not necessarily the faith, but the formed religions. And so these good men got together and they sat down and they said, how can we build a society where men and women can be able and free enough to become empowered themselves, where they can begin to develop their creative abilities, where they can begin to dream, where they can go out and do hard work and keep what they earn and have lives that are much more enriching. That was really how America was born. The Declaration of Independence was written, and what that declaration said basically is, we are an independent people. We do not want to be under your tyranny anymore. They created the Bill of Rights, which is written in it the rights that people should have in order to maintain their ability to be free and empowered and have their creativity and do what they want to with their lives, providing they're not causing harm to somebody else, because there's got to be a little bit of morality and a little bit of sense of respect as well when you move into a free society. We'll talk a little more of that later. So they created this structure of government that would have checks and balances to ensure that no group could easily take the helm and control the masses. They put safeguards into the document so that there was other checks and balances in place. And they gave another safeguard that if there happened to be a takeover of this system, they could dismantle it and create something new. They could drive out the tyrants and create something new. So the government's job became, rather than to control people, it became to oversee commerce so that there's a fairness in trade. And it's the overseeing the commerce of the several states that were being formed. And what that means is that there's a regulation that if you're selling frozen fish and you're crossing a state line, there's a requirement that you have a freezer set at a certain temperature. It's nothing that's encroaching on you. It's just for the safety so that you can continue to sell your fish and not have them spoil, even though you might not do that. But they do have that regulated because, you know, there are people that kind of try to cheat sometimes. And then the other job of the government that these men created was to protect the rights of the people so the people could always have the ability to become empowered, to find their own way, to realize who they are, why they're here, and what everything is about. So as time went on, this notion of freedom became sabotaged. It became sabotaged by people who didn't like having the population in control. Through trickery, propaganda, corruption, the oppressors snuck in little by little, bending rules, disavowing, discrediting, all of that kind of stuff in order to get their nose, the camel's nose under the tent so they could take hold of everything that they wanted and again begin to control humanity for their own gain of wealth and power. And unfortunately, because we didn't understand their trickery, we allowed our power to be transferred to them. And we sat silent while we watched this go on. And many people have fallen totally into it headlong, that they do not understand the distinction between the empowerment and disempowerment. They don't understand the distinction about a free government and a government that's oppressive. America is the only place in the world that has this ability, although I do believe that the rest of the world is going to model after this because they're tired too. Okay, so how did they do this? How did they trick us? They took over the education system, they took over the media, they took over the entertainment, they ignored the rule of law and the Constitution, which has their duties written in it. They took over the law and they put it into a two-tiered system so that some don't have to pay for their misdeeds and others pay dearly for things they don't even do. They took over religions, they took over fashion, they took over food industry, they took over the medical system. They funded themselves off of all of this while they are oppressing us more and more and more. So under these conditions, humans cannot become empowered at all. This is the environment that we do not want to live in. We want to live in a free society where we can self-realize. It's just the better way to do it. Unfortunately, there's many Americans that can't see this yet and have become quite, I guess it's in their frustration and in their lack of understanding, which some people would call ignorance, whether it's willful or not. They get very angry when they're confronted about it because they don't really understand that they have sold completely into the disempowerment. And it's kind of like, I guess when lobsters, are starting to be cooked and one guy tries to crawl out of the pot, they pull him back in the pot so he can boil along with them. Well, that's kind of what's been going on to some degree recently in this country. But that's not what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about why we need to recognize this, discern it, and look at it in a different way. We have a choice. We have a very serious choice ahead of us. Are we going to go into our own self-development and recognize and discern what's going on? Or are we going to continue to live in an emotional, chaotic state where we don't really know what's going on and we're miserable because we're running around disliking people because they may have more knowledge or an understanding, all the while we are giving our power over to people who do not have our best intentions in mind. You can always tell the good intentions by their action. Words mean nothing. It's action that matters. If we have an environment where there is a centralized control, that is going to lead us down the road of total disempowerment and a very, very nasty way to live. If we become empowered with knowledge, with understanding, with communication, we are going to go on a completely different trajectory, and humanity will be able to reach for and actually hold on to the excellence, the beauty, and the creativity that we are here to do. There's a lot of really good things we can do, especially since now we have so many technological things that we don't have to be at work for 40 hours a week unless we love it. There's a lot of animation out there, and that's a good thing because then that can do the job of manufacturing more so than humans need to do it, and humans can then break away from that tether. So it's important to begin to reason. It's important to begin to develop your intellect. And it's important to look to the outer world and see where you're getting your support from. Are you getting your support from a centralized place, or are you getting your support from other people in your community, real community, who are working together to have a great place to be and to exist? It's time for all of us to make a choice of what we want. Do we want an oligarchy that's going to control us, tell us what to do, offer us all this free stuff, but you never get it? So we have to look at that. It's important to keep the personal power in a system that is going to allow us to keep our personal power. It's important to allow our emotions to keep us out of chaos so that we can reason. And if we hear something we don't like, that we don't react in a negative way or just a berserk way, which so many people do. It's important to develop a strong character. It's important to develop a way to become self-sufficient. It's important to recognize that you're either going to go round and round in a cycle with the old disempowering structures who tell you stories every 10 years, it's the same thing over and over, or we're going to look at something that's important to create the situation where you're standing on your own 2 feet and you're helping each other how you want to help each other, and you're not being ordered, told what to do, and punished if you don't do it. So it's time to choose. It's time to choose empowerment, which means that you're living in an environment where there are a set of rules, and it's also an environment where you're informed. Empowerment is not looking for somebody to give you free things, because that's not freedom. Empowerment is looking how to do it yourself, how to get help, how to learn, how to grow with it. Empowerment requires a moral populace. You have to have some moral grounding in order for this to work, because otherwise societies will become chaotic, and then they need control, authoritarian people to keep everybody in line. So it's another thing to be responsible for yourself, and to also remember to respect the rules that are set in place. And the beautiful thing is if we don't like the rules, we can get together and we can choose to change them as a community or a nation. Disempowerment demands others give to me, me, me. It's me again. That's not really a powerful thing at all. That's disempowerment. Disempowerment absolutely requires ignorance from the population. The more ignorant a population is, the more disempowered the population will be. That's one reason why they want to control education. That's one reason you got to be very careful what you hear. That's one reason why you should do your own research and journey out and check yourself and develop your intuitive senses. And disempower also is demanding of a lack of respect, a disregard for rules, a hatred for self, and a hatred for others. Now, I said a little bit earlier that actions speak pretty loudly. So I'd like you to take a look at what's around you and see what kind of behavior you're seeing from people. If you sit down in a conversation and you say something and they don't like it and they get up and walk away from you, or they call you a name, begin to think about what that is. Is that empowerment? Is that empowerment, or is that disempowerment? It's really important. This is really important, because you can't really move forward unless you really understand the environment you're living in. It's just what it is. If there is not an environment that you can be empowered, there will be no empowerment, really. You'll have your things to do, but you will not be empowered the way humanity is supposed to be empowered. Are you going to choose an environment where governments are going to push you down? Or are you going to choose a government that will allow you to have the freedom to do what you want to do and need to do to grow? Just remember that if you're going to choose the second one, the freedom one, that does demand a moral standing. It doesn't mean that you have to have rules and regulations. You yourself you have to trust yourself. You have to get your word that your word is worth something. So when you tell somebody that you're going to do something, you do it. So your actions are speaking louder than your words. And you have to understand that it means that you respect other people, and you are willing to listen, and you're willing to acknowledge, and you're willing to learn and maybe change what you once believed in. This is the very, very first step to take about empowerment. It's not that difficult to do if you really want to do it, because I think most of us are like that. So I'm asking you to just check that out. Think about this environment that we're living in. Look at the outside world, and then check with your heart, check with your intuition, sit with it a while, ponder it, discern it, and then come to a conclusion. Because what's coming, the possibility of what's coming down the road is so fantastic. You have no idea. But we have to educate ourselves that we cannot have what's good if we're going to give our power away to people who do not have our best intentions in mind. So with that, I'm going to let you breathe, and I hope you can understand what I'm trying to say. My next part of the series, Chapter 2, is going to be about how we listen, because listening is a huge part of it. So with that, I just want to say thank you so much. Please hit the like button if you like this. Please subscribe and just keep growing, keep learning, and keep moving towards empowerment. Thank you so much for your time.